Hi, good evening everyone, and thank you again for joining us for this webinar organised in conjunction with Stringer Vets about the latest on EMS, obesity and laminitis. My name is Katie Williams, and tonight I'm joined by Eimear, McHale and Maria Reynolds Brandao from Stringer Vets, who you can see have just appeared, thank you. And we've teamed up with Stringer Vets, who are part of the Vet Partners Group, to promote the campaign Healthy Weight, Healthy Horse, which involves a series of events around the country with the various Vet Partners practices. I'll ask Eimear and Maria to introduce themselves in just a moment, but to outline what we're going to cover, they're kindly going to cover off diagnosis, medical treatment options, etc., and a little bit on EMS and laminitis, and then I'll look at the sort of feeding and management approaches we can take for managing the good doer. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. If you pop your Q&As into the Q&A box rather than the chat, then if there are any, particularly the feeding ones, as I'm on my own tonight, if we don't get to cover them off, we'll do them via the feed line tomorrow for you. Just to note that the webinar is being recorded, so it will be probably on the Dingy YouTube channel in the coming week or so, and I'm sure Stringer Vets will be wanting to share that as well, so look out for that in due course. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Eimear and Maria. Can you see the screen? Is that coming through okay? Yeah, there should be pictures of you both on the slide. So I will mute myself and just let you introduce yourselves, if that's okay.
So hopefully most of you know us, but I'm Eimear and this is Maria, and we're two of the Stringer Vets that have been roped into this, volunteered willingly.
Okay, so maybe I'll start really easily. So I think the point of this talk is just for you guys to know how to manage obesity, horses that are obese, EMS and laminitis. So I'm going to explain not very thoroughly the physiopathology, so you don't all fall asleep. So I'll try to be very simplistic and just try to explain in the efficient way what it is and how it works. So as you all know, so in England is like a pandemic of obese horses, and that's mostly due to the very nice weather that you have for the grass. So the horses shouldn't be eating as much grass as they are for the moment. So that's why more or less 70% of all horses are obese. So we'll say overweight, let's say. And what do we mean with overweight? Is usually a horse that has a score of more than 7. So 7, 8, and 9 is already considered an overweight horse. And in the case of EMS, is very important also where this fat is, where the fat is. So you have this, I just have the image of 3 places. Of course, they can be in other places, but the most important places are the neck. So you have the crest, you have the withers, and then also the loin area. So the fat tissue is not just a tissue that is just there holding fat. It's actually a biological tissue, and it produces hormones, various hormones. Then now I'm not going to explain because it's a little bit too much, but what you need to retain from this is the most important thing is they produce adiponectins, and these hormones will infect the insulin sensitivity. So that's why the horses that have EMS, they have hyperinsulinemia, meaning that their insulin in the blood is always very high. So they start to get resistant to it. So what does it mean? It means that their glucose metabolism then doesn't work properly. And in some people can also have metabolic syndrome. So we call this also type 2 diabetes. So maybe you are more comfortable with that term, and you have probably a relative or even yourself is diabetic, so you already know how it works. With people then with EMS, they are more prone to cardiac disease. In horses, it's laminitis, okay? So what happens in the lamina is the blood flow doesn't work properly. Also, the glucose doesn't work properly. So all this will cause a chronic and also acute inflammation. And then the lamina, it's, well, you probably already know how the hoof works. So you have, if I use the pointer, can you see it? I don't know.
No.
Okay, but so you have there the pedal bone, and basically it's attached inside the hoof. It's like a little shoe, and you have the lamina that works like a Velcro in the shoe. So the lamina start to get inflamed, so upset, and they detach from the shoe. So then the pedal bone, it's not attached anymore, not comfortable, and starts to move, rotate, and that's painful. So it's the inflammation and also then the pedal bone moving. So that's basically the main problem. Is really you have an overweight horse then has more fat. That fat will produce specific hormones that are going to make your horse resistant to insulin, high insulin because of the sugar. Then you have inflammation, you have the laminitis. So this is basically, in a very simplistic way, what happens when you have an obese horse that have EMS. So the next slide, please, for the diagnosis. So as for diagnosis, most of you already know, it's very simple. Actually, we take a blood sample. You can take at rest. So usually what we like to measure is simply insulin. Of course, you can measure other things, but okay, I'm not going to go for now at that point because that's more interest for us as vets, and for you owners, I think it's more interesting just to know that we measure the insulin at rest. You have a few values. So a normal horse usually should be around 6. Of course, if they just ate, it can be around 20. That's normal. So it will really depend. Okay, is it specific? Not so much. So imagine if you have a horse and you take blood, you suspect that he has EMS, and suddenly you have a value of 20. Okay, then you don't know exactly, is it because he just ate? Is he already starting to be a little bit with a little bit metabolic syndrome? So ideally, when you are not sure, you should do another test called the carrot test, because it's very simple. You just basically give them orally a solution, a sugary solution, and then you measure the insulin afterwards. Or if this doesn't work for some reason, it's just not practical for you to feed it, you can do also an oral glucose absorption test. And this is with a tube. It's a little bit more complicated anyway. Both tests is just to measure the response of the horse after giving a sugary solution. So this way we know for sure how the horse is responding to sugar. So you can also try to do it with specific types of foods, for example, just to know how your horse reacts to different types of foods. And another thing that owners can do at home that's quite easy, just really looking at the horse and starting to feel comfortable assessing the degree of overweight your horse might be. So first thing that you can do is having a measuring tape. It's quite easy, so you know more or less the weight. And then there's also this very nice app that we will talk in the end. So you get more comfortable assessing the fatness in the crest, in the loins, and also in the withers. So that's basically how we diagnose it. And next slide for the treatment.
So I think I got the easier end of things. Maria got the real technical stuff, but basically for our treatments, I'm sure a lot of you know or have dealt with one of us in this regard. Firstly, diet is going to be really important. I will leave all of that to Katie. And then next, exercise. I'm sure if you've come across myself or Maria, definitely we will have emphasized the importance of exercise. So really, like, it's similar to human diabetes. It's like our doctors telling us we have to do 30 minutes of active exercise a day. It really improves your body's sensitivity to insulin, and that can really help the metabolism. So active exercise, at least 15 minutes. It needs to be like trotting work, something that really gets your horse working. And then if you have like quite severe blood values, if your horse is actively suffering from laminitis, or if we're concerned, we might offer a little bit of extra help in terms of drugs. So there's 3 kind of mainstays we use. The first, more traditionally used and probably less commonly used now, is metformin. So that was originally designed actually for type 2 diabetes in humans. And it basically changes the way your body handles glucose. I think probably for us, the absorption in horses isn't that well proven. Obviously, they have quite a different digestive system to humans, so it might not necessarily be absorbed as well. So that's why we kind of try to move towards these other drugs. The second one is levothyroxine, which is thyroid hormone. And I always get asked if the people can take it too, because basically it causes your metabolism to massively increase and gives you lots of extra help to lose weight. Now, obviously, they don't have a problem with their thyroid, so this is specifically used just to increase the metabolism. The one thing I would say with this drug is you have to be so careful not to overfeed them, because their appetite will obviously increase. So you need to keep their diet the same, because if you increase the food as their metabolism increases, then you don't get any result. And then the third one is the one we all struggle to say. So it's ertigliflozin. And we usually call it the E word paste in the office. So what that one is it reduces the reabsorption of glucose from the kidneys. And this can really help with the way the body reacts to insulin. So a lot of our EMS ponies are insulin resistant. And this can really push the insulin down. And like in research, they found that the insulin level is probably the best indicator for laminitis. So if your horse has an insulin of over 40, I think they're 75% like chance of them getting laminitis in the next 4 years. So it's quite a good indicator of future bouts of laminitis. So you might have like a common one would be a horse that has been like maybe had a high insulin for quite a few years, and then suddenly they go down with laminitis, and the owners are asking us like, but she's been this condition for quite a while, why now? And it's kind of a ticking time bomb really. So sometimes like ertical-flozin is a newer one we've been trialing, but we've had really good results.
Yeah.
So I think that's us.
Yeah. But just to be clear, the most important part for the treatment, it's really diet and exercise.
Yeah.
These are just extra.
They're cheating.
They're cheating. Yeah.
But sometimes you need to cheat, but
yeah,
it's good if you can do the first two.
Yeah, and would you I'm going to ask a few questions if I may. Would you sort of, if a horse presented with a laminitis or a pony, would you use things like metformin in that sort of acute scenario to try and help get the weight off, or is it sort of too late once you've got laminitis?
I personally wouldn't use metformin in that situation. I would either reach for ertical-flozin or for the levothyroxine. Those drugs are really, that is the exact situation we would use them in. So if a horse has gone down with laminitis and that kind of limits them from exercise for a while, because obviously they're painful, so they can't really get good cardio exercise. Obviously we like them to walk a little bit once their feet are supported, but they can't get the level of cardio exercise we want them to have. So that's when we reach for those drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, so and if you were going to use metformin, you would use it perhaps at the stage where they're obese, but maybe obviously not necessarily laminitic at that point. Or would you not use it at all?
I don't really use it at all. If I'm perfectly honest, I know we have some clients that have their horses have been on it and they found that it works for their horse, something like that. But personally, I don't prescribe it at all, really.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the diet. That's the most important part. That's what you're going to talk about. And we just really say, especially when they're in the acute phase, diet needs to be strict, no grass, just really make sure soaked hay, and with the extra help of the medication, that's pretty much what we do.
Yeah, I think I remember a talk that I attended with, I think it was Nicola Menzies-Gow, and I think she found there was something like a 7% absorption of the metformin in the study. So it's
4 to 7% absorption. Yes.
Yeah, it's very low, isn't it? And you sort of think, well, but like you say, I think some people find it works, and you know, sometimes I don't think we can offer an explanation as to why it would in some and not others, but it's just interesting to get different people's experiences of it. And just one more question, I'm really sort of stealing the question time, but if you were sort of presented with a horse that was overweight, would you sort of do the insulin tests sort of routinely just to try and sort of establish whether and would you use the insulin level to give a diagnosis of EMS as such, or how would you sort of explain that difference, I suppose, between obesity and actual EMS or insulin dysregulation?
Yes, definitely. I would do just a blood test to see how the insulin is, just a basal insulin. If I think it's not enough, probably I would go for the carrot test just to be sure that that horse is not in the risk of EMS. And just looking at the horse, you can also see where, again, the fat deposits are, because especially in Portugal, so it's a little bit different. We don't have so much green grass. We have more mature kind of grass. So we also have a little fatter horses, but not like here. So because they do a lot of exercise, so the fat just goes into different places. So although they are also, you can say, a little bit overweight because they do so much exercise and they eat mostly more mature grass, they don't have EMS. Although you look at them and you say, oh, it's a little bit overweight horse. Here, they are overweight and not doing enough exercises and eating the foods that they shouldn't be eating. So in this case, yes, I would 100% do a blood test to see how their insulin is responding. And if you change the diet, for example, after a while, and you know that for specific type of breeds, they are more prone to it, like ponies, then of course I would take a blood sample just to be sure that everything is going all right.
I think the thing about our bloods as well is we're lucky enough that our lab that we send the bloods to, Rainbow, have an EMS panel, so it does give us the insulin, adiponectin, the glucose, so it can kind of give us supportive information. So we're looking at the insulin and what that level is, but we also look at the adiponectin, which is an indicator of metabolic obesity. And I think the other thing to remember is sometimes your horse might not be like specifically look very obese compared to some of its mates, but like if it has this really metabolic fat in these certain areas, it might not be huge, but it might just have these really stubborn pockets, and that's the problem as well. It's not just really massive.
No, it's the specific, the regional fat. That's the problem.
Yeah. And how often do you find, or do you ever find that ponies and horses will get laminitis with relatively normal insulin levels, or are you always seeing a raised insulin before you get a sort of laminitis issue?
Always see a raised insulin, I would say in terms of like sampling that we're doing, we would have a few horses a week that we're sampling for EMS and finding metabolic derangements. And I think the thing with the blood is it really is a red flag or a warning sign for us, so it allows us to act before we have that problem. And that means we have our proper tools, so we can make them exercise and we can look at the diet, and it's not like firefighting.
Yeah, no, it's a really worthwhile way of establishing the risk, isn't it? Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll stop hogging all the questions, so we'll come back to a Q&A session at the end. So thank you for that. I'll crack on with the sort of feeding and managing a good doer. So feel free to grab a cuppa if you want to. And yeah, so feeding and managing the good doer, there's a lot of information and to some extent misinformation out there, but we're going to try and break the diet down into sort of 3 distinct areas. So looking at how we manage the grass intake, both Eimear and Maria have highlighted how pasture is such a big issue in the UK in particular. If we take the grass away, we have to put something else in, because our horses are herbivores, so they need some form of high fibre ration to ensure they have a healthy digestive system and that we don't encourage other sort of issues like gastric ulcers. And just one of the common questions we get asked on the feed line is, do I actually need to use any bucket feed for my good doer? So we'll explore some of the sort of concepts behind what sort of feeds are appropriate if you're going to use a bucket feed. But starting with this sort of grass intake, and I've sort of called it the energy gap, really, because the grass is a big part of the obesity challenge that we face in the UK. Now, the slide is showing effectively the energy on the yellow line that is provided by grass throughout the year. This is assuming it's a 500 kilo horse, so a small horse, out at grass 24/7, and taking sort of average values for the energy levels in pasture throughout the year. So you can see in the spring, the yellow line is at its highest, because that's when the digestible energy that the animal consumes from pasture is at its highest. And in the winter months, it drops down to its lowest point. But what you can then see from the sort of bluey black line and the green line is the amount of energy a horse actually requires for maintenance, which is the dark blue line, and the green line is if it's doing light work. And you can see that it's really only from maintenance perspective in the depths of winter where the horses are actually moving into a negative energy gap. In other words, pasture can't actually give it enough energy to meet its requirements. And then if the horse is doing some work, then obviously the difference is a bit greater and might start to occur sort of in late autumn. Now, what I would say to this is that these are average pasture values, so it obviously varies in different parts of the country. And in Dengie, we're based down in the southeast in Essex. We haven't had any snow in the last sort of 6 months this winter, and we've hardly had sort of any serious frost. So certainly people have been mowing lawns for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the grass has been growing throughout the winter. So although This is taking average values. I think as temperatures seem to be rising, the grass will grow for a longer period of time. That so-called energy gap is probably going to get smaller and smaller. And I'm sure in many cases, depending on the sort of ability of the horse to hold weight, that energy gap's already gone the other way. So we actually have a surplus throughout the whole year. So this is part of the problem, and it's our biggest challenge, because at the end of the day, we want horses to be outside in fields where, you know, we consider it to be their natural environment. They're going to be at their happiest. They potentially have the chance to interact with other horses if they're kept in groups and things. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons why, you know, and quite rightly so, we want animals to be turned out. But it does give us a bit of a challenge when it comes to managing energy intake. So what options do we have? Well, the no grass area. And any of you that have seen some of our previous webinars will know that that's my colleague Tracy's pony Kizzy, who is extremely well managed and has brilliant facilities on the yard where Tracy keeps her. And those truly no grass areas are probably the best way, you know, ultimately to ensure we've got control over what's going in. We have other options like strip grazing and track systems, which are becoming ever more complicated and stimulating for horses turned out. They're more like the equivalent, I think, of a sort of playpen for horses, with lots of different things they can be occupied doing rather than eating. But if none of those are available to us, and we literally have a fairly lush paddock to turn onto, then that's when grazing muzzles can come into play and have their place. So we'll cover off one or two of those in a little bit more detail. And as I said, really a properly bare paddock is something that has no grass at all. A great exercise, if you really are in any doubt as to how much grass is coming through in your starvation or bare paddock, as they're often called, is fence a corner off and don't let the horse have access to it, because you'll see how much grass grows in a matter of a few weeks, and obviously that is going somewhere normally if the horse has access to it. So although these horses seem to live on fresh air, it's amazing how much grass they are still actually consuming, even on a relatively sparse paddock. So the only way to get true control or complete control over what the horse is actually consuming is to put them on something like a wood chips or a sand paddock. Now, obviously sand has a few issues if you're going to feed forage off the floor, potential for sand accumulation and sand colic, but that's not insurmountable. But the wood chip paddocks are becoming increasingly popular, and you can see in this image lots of livery yards are now offering them as a place to be able to turn out, either to stop their own paddocks being trashed, but also in terms of calorie control for good doers. And it does mean your horse can move around a bit more, can interact with others over the fence more so than it might do in a stable, and obviously benefiting from being out in fresh air. So looking for the right livery yard with the right facilities can go a long way in helping you manage these horses and ponies much more effectively. And I would say this is the challenge when you're trying to diet a herbivore in principle. If you're a dog or cat owner and you've got to put them on a ration, as long as you cut out the tidbits and increase the exercise, you can buy low calorie feeds and everything comes in one bag. We have so many more variables with horses because we're trying to estimate or calculate exactly what they're consuming, and it's very hard. We simply don't know how much energy grass or hay at any one time will vary. And if you take samples and do analysis, that gives you a snapshot, but how accurate is it of the bigger picture throughout a whole winter or a whole summer season in the case of pasture? So it is much harder, and the more we can remove some of those variables and get control over what's going in, the easier it is to manage them. Now, in some cases, it's the acute scenario where we're going to put them on these sort of wood chip paddocks. It may not be viable longer term, but if you've really got to get the weight off, such as in the situations that Emma and Maria were describing, you've got a raised insulin level and you need to get the weight off before it develops into a laminitis case, then temporarily using something like this can be really helpful, and as I say, stop it becoming a clinical issue. But if you can do it for the long term, it's going to give you much greater control of you, basically trying to achieve a healthier horse for the long term. But if you don't have that, then there is some evidence to show that grazing muzzles are pretty effective if they're used properly. Tracy did her MSc study and found that they restricted intake by around 75 to 86%. In a published study by Annette Longland et al., they actually found a similar range of around 75 to 88%, which is, great that it sort of substantiates or backs up the two studies found very similar reductions in intake. But obviously, when you take those muzzles off, if you're allowing the horse access to really good quality pasture, they will compensate. And particularly in the case of ponies, they can consume masses in a very short space of time, even a few hours. They're potentially going to be consuming more than they actually need. So if you are going to use them, the advice from Annette Longland and colleagues is basically to try and use it for about 10 hours out of a 24-hour period, and then bring them off the grass for the rest of the time. And just try to, sort of manage them as best you can. If it is coming into a stable, it's not ideal. If you can put them into a menage or a paddock, those wood chip paddocks or something, so that they've had some time at grass and some time off it, then those are all options that you can consider. But essentially, the grazing muzzles, people don't necessarily like the look of them or the idea of them. I work with a few charities where they're open to the public, the general public come around, and they spend, staff spend all their time trying to explain why these horses have got muzzles on, and it's just probably not a viable thing to use for the horses on public display. So I can see why people don't like them or wouldn't use them. Some horses get out of them very easily, but if it's the only option when this is the sort of quality of grass you've got access to, it could potentially be a lifesaver compared to having laminitis. If you are going to use them, try and introduce them gradually. Make sure the horse is happy to drink and eat with the muzzle on, which may take a little bit of time, just showing them that putting their heads in a bucket, that they can actually drink through it. You do have to be careful that because they can't use their teeth to sort of fight off some of the other horses, especially if they're an older horse in a group or something like that, you be careful they're not getting bullied by others in the group, because they can't literally bite back. As I say, use for 10 to 12 hours and then bring off the grass in if you can. And if you need to adapt them by putting back bandages and things, or vet wrap or something around it so they don't rub, you can plait the mane across over the top with the forelock to try and stop them getting out of them. But and the other objection I come across and have seen more recently, when the horse is wearing them for prolonged periods of time or over a period of time, it can actually erode the sort of incisors as they're kind of grazing against them. But we have to weigh up which is the greatest threat to the horse or pony at any one time. And if it's a case of wearing the muzzle for some time to promote weight loss, so we don't end up with a laminitis case, then generally that's preferable, certainly in the short term, compared to some of the other issues that might occur. So there's some of the areas we, sort of in terms of grazing management and advice that we can suggest. If we are taking the grass away, then we do have to maintain a certain level of fibre intake. And again, without getting sort of too technical, we're using forage when there isn't enough pasture, but fibre is basically essential for digestive health. And there's a term called sort of leaky gut syndrome that is really used to describe the situation where if you haven't got enough fibre going in, because fibre is actually producing the energy that the colonocytes, so the cells of the gut, are actually using themselves, it has been shown in other species that it makes those cells less healthy. So the junctions between them, normally they're very tight in a row, and they're stopping undesirable things in the gut from leaking out of the gut into the rest of the body. But as soon as the health of the cells in the gut becomes compromised, they become more permeable, they move apart, the gaps become a bit bigger, and effectively larger molecules or more harmful molecules can then pass through the gut into the body, and it's called this sort of leaky gut syndrome. So we're surmising, and as is often the case with equine nutrition and equine health, that principle is applying. So if we go too low on the fibre intake, we know that it has negative impacts on the gut and the health of the gut. It certainly has a negative impact on the microbial population, the bugs that live in the gut as well. And that's really why we're trying to maintain as much fibre as we can going in without promoting weight gain. And it's one of those weird phenomena, really, in the sense that we don't actually know exactly how much fibre the horse needs. We talk about how much forage to feed and what we believe is the sort of minimum level required to maintain gut health. And that tends to be 1.5% on a dry matter basis of the horse's body weight. So even for a good doer, as soon as we start to go below that level of 1.5% dry matter, we're potentially starting to compromise the health of the gut. Now, again, I can't stress enough, if you're in an acute situation, you've got to promote weight loss, and maybe under supervision from your vet, and in a sort of short term, if you've got to go below that because they're not losing weight at 1.5% dry matter, and of course that tends to be the necessary route or the necessary sort of action you're going to take. But for the sort of longer term management and balancing health and well-being of these horses, it's far more preferable to use a lower calorie or lower calorie density forage, something like straw, which we'll come to in a minute, and feed more of it, or at least that 1.5%, rather than using a better quality forage and using less of it. Because what we're trying to achieve is more chews for less calories. It's a bit like you or I standing around sort of eating carrot sticks or celery for most of the day, as opposed to being allowed one donut at lunchtime. And that's the principle, because the horse is a herbivore. It's designed to eat little and often for around 16 to 18 hours of every day, and that's what we've got to replicate. So we need those low energy or low energy density forages to promote chew time, keep the gut healthy without promoting weight gain. So what is forage? Well, it can be any of these sort of high fibre materials, really. So grass, cereal, straw, and alfalfa are probably the most commonly used forages in the UK. And we conserve it either by removing the water, so simply drying it, or we take the air away, wrapping it in plastic. Now, to dry it, we can sun dry, so grass, hays and straws tend to be sun dried, or we can use hot air, and that tends to be what's used for things like alfalfa and grass, which you then chop up and sell as sort of bagged forages. Now, removing the air creates an anaerobic, so in the absence of oxygen, environment, and that allows the fermentation to occur. So silage or haylage would be the end results of that fermentation process, but it does need some moisture in order for that process to occur. What we find is that if we wrap something that's very, very dry, almost to the point of being a hay, then actually what we end up with is with wrapped hay rather than a haylage. And there was a lovely piece of work done by Cecilia Muller from Uppsala in Sweden. And what was really nice about this is that she took the samples, if you like, from the same field. So we're trying to eliminate some of the variables. When we analyse hays or haylages and things, they're usually taken from different cuts, different parts of the country, and you're not really comparing like with like. So we get some principles, and the more samples you get, the more data you build up. But what this study did was take 3 different conservation techniques from the same field and compared the impact. So it's really looking at what impact the conservation technique has, rather than some of the variables like grass species or temperature. What I've also then dropped in is the wrapped hay data from the analysis that we do here at Dengie. And you can see from the sort of bits that I've highlighted effectively, WSC is the sugar, so that would be the water-soluble carbohydrates. And in a normal hay, it's dried basically up to about 90%, so it's very dry, taking all that moisture out, and the sugar is still there. Okay, so there's no lactic acid, that's your marker of your fermentation, because there's no fermentation gone on, so we wouldn't expect to see any. Now, from Cecilia's work at the other end of the spectrum, if we look at silage, which has a really low dry matter, so it's 70% water, 30% dry matter, you can see that the sugar level has dropped because the fermentation process has converted that sugar to the lactic acid. So it's a slightly more acidic forage, it's a silage, and that's because the sugar has been converted to the acid, which is the lactic acid in this case. Now the haylage, and this is like in Cecilia's work, is pretty much a true haylage, somewhere in the region of 50 to 60% dry matter, so 40 to 50% water. There's some fermentation that's gone on, so you can see that 2.6, a little indicator or marker of some fermentation, but there's still some sugar there. And what we see in the wrapped hay data collectively is a much higher dry matter, so probably in the region of 75-80% in most cases. Because it's so dry, it hasn't really fermented to any degree, so the sugar is still there. So remember, this is a wrap forage, but the sugar is still there, and there's a little bit of maybe some fermentation. And it just goes to show the sort of, I suppose, the differences. And when we're going to analyse forages, looking at the data is really important. So if you had a wrapped hay, actually the sugar level is probably comparable to a normal hay. It's only when we look at things like the fermented forages that the sugar level has actually been reduced through the conservation technique. Now, we're all aiming for this sort of 10 to 12% WSC, or sort of sugar value, which is easier to achieve in other countries than it is in our lush green pastures. And we'll give you some guidelines next on the sort of 5 top factors really affecting the sort of quality or the energy and nutritional value of these forages. So number 1, obviously, what are we conserving? Is it grass? Obviously, it's going to be higher in sugar if it's grass compared to straw. And then within that forage, what species of plant have we got? So typically, but not always, Timothy tends to be a lower sugar forage than if we're making hay or haylage from a ryegrass, but that's not always the case. Timing. Now, this is really important. So if you have the luxury of making your own forage, or you can work with your supplier, try, if you need a low sugar, low calorie sort of forage, try to encourage them, or do it yourself if you can, to harvest later. The more mature the grass plants will be when you harvest them, the lower the digestibility of them, and therefore the harder it is for the horse to break them down and get nutrition from them before it's passed through the gut. And that's what we're basically trying to do, is create an immature, more fibrous, less digestible forage by cutting it later. And that means a first cut later. So just check if someone says, oh yeah, it was cut in August or September, just make sure it was the first cut and not the second one, because obviously a second cut in August and September will not be the same as something that was the first cut off that field. Weather conditions have a big impact. 2018 was that really long, hot, dry summer. And we did some analysis, and it was the sort of a customer, and it was the highest I've ever seen, which was a 35% WSC. And it simply is the equation. Basically, it's in a sort of stress situation. You've got a drought going on, there's a lot of sunshine, so it's photosynthesizing, producing the sugar, it's concentrating it up because the plant's in a stress mode, and effectively, you're going to end up with a really high sugar forage. So just watch out for that. Even the timing of cutting and the weather conditions on the day when you harvest some of these forages can have an impact on the sugar level. So a dull sort of overcast day is likely to give you a lower sugar forage than a bright sunny day. Plants are using sugar in the dark, so although they're not photosynthesizing, they're using up what they've produced the day before. So if you can cut early the next morning, it's more likely to have a lower sugar value. If you cut it later in the day, you've got that full days of photosynthesis going on, and then that's when you harvest it. So that's when it's likely to have its highest sugar levels. Now, I appreciate we don't all have the luxury of working with our supplier or doing our harvesting of our pasture ourselves. But if you are able to make your own hay, these are some of the things that you can do to try and reduce the sugar content, or ask your farmer, if they are amenable to working with you. Some things like this can make a real difference. We're often asked, so what should I use? And sometimes it is a case of what have you got? And I've got a case study at the end to sort of demonstrate that. So, real world situations happen, and you can't always have the perfect forage for your horse. What I would say is that haylage tends to be harvested earlier than hay. So therefore, it needs less drying time. So therefore, it tends to be that the plants are younger, more digestible, and the horse extracts more from it. But the hay is higher in sugar, as we saw from Cecilia's work. If you're properly fermenting a haylage, it will have utilised some of that sugar, if not most of it, and therefore it actually is the lower sugar forage. And that's where we start to have this dilemma. How do we distinguish between sugar content and how fattening or how calorie dense the product is? They're not the same thing, and this causes so much confusion all the way through feeding. The assumption is if something's high in sugar, it's going to be the highest calorie option, and that is not always the case. So the default recommendation tends to be hay because it is usually higher in fibre, cut later, more mature, and therefore less digestible. And so it's less likely to promote weight gain. So it is the logical thing to do. But as I say, when you do the analysis, make sure that you're getting the sort of the best option, not just the default, because it doesn't always stack up. And if you've got a hay and you're going with it, there are things we can do to reduce the sugar content. Soaking is usually the strategy employed. And again, there's varying schools of thought on how much, how long to soak it for, the sort of water to hay ratio. Generally speaking, the advice is the more water you can use to hay, then the greater the opportunity is for the sugar to leach out. It's a simple sort of osmosis kind of reaction in effect. So if you can have 10 parts water, brilliant. Again, real world scenario, who's got a container big enough, and the water bill and all the sorts of environmental reasons that you might consider not using quite so much as that, but that has been suggested, and I think only partly in jest. So as a general rule, the more water you can do in your practical situation to encourage the sugar leaching, the better. And obviously, if you can change it more frequently, so you put fresh water in, if you're going to soak it for a prolonged period of time, then that will help increase losses as well. Temperature comes into play, so the warmer water tends to encourage more sugar losses. Some studies have shown, again, 16 degrees C for the water. That's not possible for most of us to achieve, particularly in the depths of the winter. So again, the warmer you can get it and what's practical for you, the more sugar you're likely to leach. So timing, now this is obviously dependent on some of the above factors to do. More water you can use tends to mean the less time needed. If you don't have the luxury of a huge, great sort of soaking barrel, then maybe doing sort of 2 hours, change the water another 2 hours, so that you're trying to increase the losses that way. The problem, I suppose, to the longer soaking is you're losing a lot of dry matter as well. So actually, if you're getting up to sort of double figures, the dry matter losses from the forage are so great that you're then actually having to start to feed more to ensure we're achieving the minimum amount of forage that the horse is consuming. So that becomes a little bit self-defeating, and also you're losing a lot of the valuable nutrients, so things sort of minerals, protein, whatever it might be. So again, the nutritional quality is deteriorating, and obviously in hot conditions it will start to ferment. It is not great to be feeding hay that's been sort of fermenting in warm water for a long period of time. So you're probably, if you can, better to start with a lower sugar forage in the first place, and then use the soaking approach if you have to, and obviously trying to apply what is practical for you in your situation. But generally speaking, more water. If it's warmer, then your losses will be greater. Not everyone can use hay, so if you have a horse or pony that has respiratory issues, and in some cases even soaking isn't an option, then a wrapped hay may well be a more appropriate thing to use. Again, a wrapped hay isn't always harvested earlier in the season, so work with your supplier if you have to have the wrapped forage, because it's generally cleaner. Try and get them to do it later. It can be counterintuitive to think that a horse with poor teeth is going to be a good doer, but it does happen, and particularly in these horses that have wind-sucked or cribbed, or even the grazing muzzles where they've eroded perhaps the incisors, they can actually still be quite good doers, but might struggle to get through the sort of getting the hay. So again, the alternatives may be suitable for them. Sometimes you're on a yard where there's only haylage, inverted commas, could be wrapped hay available, so you might not have a choice, and shortage of supply. And this has been an issue in recent times, and I'll come to that in the case study that we've got. And also, what do we do if the hay analysis comes back? That should be the other way. What do we do if the haylage analysis comes back more sort of appropriate for a good doer than the hay? And that's the conundrum that we face often if we've done the analysis. If it's telling you something that is a bit counterintuitive or not the obvious choice, you've got to be quite brave to do it. So with this latter scenario, if you've got to use, or the yard has only got haylage, then we can start to try and dilute what we have, if it's too good for our horse or pony, with some straw. So previous work, and we did a webinar on good doers back in, I think it was October, and even since then, just in the last 6 months, there's been some new studies that have come out that have sort of moved this area along, which is really nice because it's great to be able to share it. It was published in late 2021, so Janssen et al. Is the study, and they were actually looking at whether we could safely feed up to 50% wheat straw without causing any sort of detrimental issues, so things like gastric ulcers. There has been a study done a few years ago now, again in Scandinavia, where they showed that if straw was the sole or the predominant source of forage, there was an increased risk of ulcers, which is why some people have concerns about using straw. And this Janssen et al. Paper published in December was really trying to explore that a bit further. And they found no negative impact of using 50% wheat straw alongside, and in this case it was actually a haylage. So they could replace 50% of the haylage with the same weight of straw, and actually no negative impacts on horse health whatsoever. So that takes us, whereas last year we were probably sort of talking about a third of the ratio of the straw, of the forage being straw, we're now up to 50% being considered to be safe from this study. Now, we did some calculations just on the third of straw, so replacing a third of the hay you would normally give with a third of straw, and that actually achieved a 16% reduction in the calorie intake. So if we're going to go higher than that, even maybe up to 50% straw in the ration, and if we're replacing a better quality forage, so something like haylage, that saving could be even more significant, so possibly a 25% reduction. And happy days, from a nutritionist perspective, we're not even reducing the volume of forage that animals consuming, we've just switched it for something. So we're maintaining that sort of forage supply or that fibre supply whilst reducing the calorie intake. And that, that is what we're aiming for. Now, it's interesting to note that we have a reference text called the NRC, and they're suggesting that to reduce a half a unit on a 5-point scale. So I think Maria sort of showed that 7, 8, 9 on a 9-point scale is what we'd consider to be overweight. On the 5-point scale, if we're just shifting half a unit, which is probably one of those units on the 9-point scale, or as near to it as you can really, actually requires a reduction in energy intake of around 11 to 15%. So lo and behold, if we take a third of our hay and replace it with straw, we're already starting to get the level of calorie reduction required to achieve a 1-point change on a 9-point scale and a half a point change on the 5-point condition scoring scale. So that's the sort of thing we need to be doing to achieve some weight loss. You can soak straw. So obviously it's sun-dried like grass hay, so if we're going to soak it or steam it, if you have lucky enough to have a steamer, that will help improve its hygienic quality. And you can mix it into the hay net, so it can actually slow some of these greedy types down as well. And what was really exciting, and again, it is one study, so we have to moderate our excitement to some extent, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in, and we're doing some work with some students on this. We were discussing it last week. This 2021 study actually found that the slower rate of intake achieved with using the straw meant that there was basically a negligible insulinemic response to the evening meal. It took them so long to eat their forage that effectively there was no noticeable spike in insulin response to it, because it wasn't a meal. It took them a really long time to eat it. Now, if you've got an insulin dysregulated horse, then this is kind of the sorts of things that we have to be striving for. And I personally think that the rate of intake is one of the key issues. It's just as important as what we're putting in is how quickly they're consuming it. So the more we can slow them down, the better. And obviously that applies to the bucket feed as well. So if we're using chopped straw as a basis to the fibre in the bucket to slow them down, great. But effectively, if we can sort of negate some of that sugar intake from the hay, and inevitably it's going to be in there, sugar, grass has sugar in it. If we can dilute it and slow them down, this has got to be a huge step in the right direction. Now, obviously, those with poor dentition or a history of colics or impaction colics, then that may not be a sensible thing to do, is start introducing large amounts of straw. So there are some situations, and again, talk to your vet if you have any concerns or doubts about it. But also just bear in mind that straw is a commonly used ingredient if you're using a chopped fibre, a high fibre, low calorie one, there will be straw in it in most cases. So it's not an alien ingredient. And just because we're starting to put it into the hay net as well, we should really call them forage nets, shouldn't we? You know, it's doing the right thing. It's not, I don't know, maybe there's some stigma attached to using straw or feeding straw, but it's certainly something we need to move past, because it could be a really useful tool. I alluded to the fact that analysis is probably only good as sampling, you know, quality of sampling you do. Multiple samples mixed together generally is better than one sample from one bale. Without, again, sort of boring you to death with analysis, carbohydrates are notoriously difficult to analyse, and that's why we have all these dilemmas about, you know, how representative, how useful these targets are. They're always guidelines, and we have to put the real world you know, principles on it as well. But if you have had some tests done from other, you know, companies or whatever, you know, do ask us if you're not sure what they are, what they mean. We're very happy to interpret some results for you. And again, as I sort of mentioned, really use that alongside what you know. So when was it harvested, what the, you know, the grass species are, all those other things, and what you can see and feel about forage. The more like straw a hay looks, the more like straw it is likely to be nutritionally. If we can make forage last longer, as I've just sort of said from that study, it's really important. So if we're going to use some chopped fibres in a trug as a sort of partial hay replacer, then putting big sort of balls on the top, reducing the surface area. You can do it with really large pebbles. You know, they've got to be big enough that the horse isn't accidentally going to pick them up. And as long as they're smooth, the animal has to eat around them. And sometimes they can be helpful for weighing it down, so they don't just tip the whole thing up and then stuff it down just as quickly. So there are various strategies you can use, and the small hold nets and foragers and things that are available now and work really well. So on the forage side of things, the sort of takeaway actions really are: harvest as mature plants as possible, source the late cut forage, look for things like long timothy heads. So the longer the seed head, that sort of timothy, almost like a fairy tale, is, then it generally indicates the forage is more mature. Generally avoid ryegrasses, but if you've got to use something that's got ryegrass in it, go for a later cut. Cut early in the day on those cloudy but dry days, and dilute with anywhere between a third and half of straw. So they're the key things you can do. I did say I'd just touch on why do good doers need a bucket feed, and this slide basically sort of says it all really. If we just put animals on an average hay in the UK, the forages reflect the soils they're grown on. We're deficient for things like selenium and copper in our soils. So you can see there that if they're just on hay, they're missing out on those essential nutrients. And copper and selenium, zinc, they're all part of the antioxidants in the horse's body. So, you know, if you are going to work these horses as well, then they're going to use antioxidants to repair and recover from exercise. But they are essential minerals that are needed for other functions too. So that is why we generally advocate some form of trace mineral supplementation, and potentially the lysine, which is the essential amino acid, may be required as well. So the sort of top tips really, if you're going to use something in the bucket, then, you know, low calorie, it goes without saying. So low calorie is anything less than 8.5, so megajoules per kilo. So look out for that as a guideline. You want something that's low in sugar and starch as well. Now, the chopped fibre feeds generally lay weight less in a scoop, so they can actually help to satisfy appetite and increase chew time. But if you're able to use forages and straw and things, then you only just need a handful to mix in your balancer or your supplement, because all you're effectively doing is just trying to slow the rate of intake. The balancer or the vitamin and mineral supplement is where all the essential nutrition is coming from, and as long as you've got plenty of fibre in the rest of the ration, you don't need to feed bucketfuls of it in the bucket feed. It's just to slow them down, or if you're using it as a partial hay replacer, or I don't know, maybe it's more convenient to use a trug of hay replacer in the middle of the day if they're coming in from the field. But how do balancers work? Because again, they can cause a bit of confusion. What you're getting is lots of what you do want. So something like copper, we've just used that as an example, or a marker, if you like, of the sorts of levels you get. And you're not getting the energy, the DE there that you don't want. So in this case, if you were to use a high fibre cube, it would be around about 10 megajoules per kilo. In theory, you should be feeding about 2 kilos a day to get the right level of copper. But obviously with a balancer, you feed much less. It's a few coffee mugs, so maybe 500 grams. And therefore your energy supplied is, well, in this case, about a quarter of what you'd get from a high fibre cube. But you get the level of copper and some, if you like, compared to what you would get if you were feeding a high fibre cube. So it's effectively concentrating up all those essential nutrients and making sure they're supplied in the ration at about the level you need without too many calories. And certainly compared to something like a high fibre cube, they're going to do a much better job of providing a balanced diet. So with sort of various products that would do the job, but I just wanted to finish with the a case study, because Remy here is actually not the stereotypical sort of native pony, and he does demonstrate how sometimes the analysis can lead us down a path we don't necessarily want to go. But he was diagnosed with EMS. Now he's ridden by Amanda Shetcliffe, who is on the world-class para dressage, but he competes in I suppose able-bodied dressage. He was on the long list for Tokyo 2020. He's always been chunky, but diagnosed with EMS last year, so that would actually be the year before. But metformin isn't allowed under FEI competition rules, and as you've heard earlier, there's some debate as to how effective it's going to be. But we had to manage him through his dietary changes and weight loss strategies, exactly as Eimear and Maria were describing, really. But in the January 2021, his weight was 720 kilos, and he was a good 4.5 out of a 5 on the body condition score. So he wasn't your classic or easy to sort of feed candidate. He, despite being a very good doer and generally enjoying his sort of food, he won't eat anything with straw in. So all the stuff I've been saying about using straw went out the window with Remy. And you can, sort of try as you might, if he's not going to eat the straw, he's just not going to be getting his nutrition. And he is competing at a quite high level. He's working quite hard, he's in training. So it is important we get some nutrition into him. So yes, the aim is a low sugar and low calorie diet, but we had to slightly bend the rules with him. So finding something he would eat, we actually ended up using the Performance Plus Balancer, which is just the level of vitamins he needs for the work he's doing. And we couldn't persuade him to eat anything with straw in. So in this case, he actually went onto Alpha Original. But, and this is another one where we had a really high sugar content. We limited his grazing, so brought him off the grass to say get control over it. We did look at the two options, and sadly the hay was the one that was 36.8%, but the lower WSC option was actually probably a wrapped hay really, but the haylage as they understood it. And because he was on world-class sort of run up to the Olympics and things, we had to really battle to convince people that the haylage was the right option. It seems so counterintuitive given all of his condition and situation. And that's what I say, if you're going to embark on analysis, you've got to believe what it tells you. If you're going to do this and then still choose to use the hay, even though it's 36.8% WSC, it makes the whole thing a bit of a pointless exercise. So we went with the haylage, even though, perhaps the default position is to go for hay, but on analysis, it was significantly lower in sugar. And I think the results sort of speak for themselves. We got control over what he was eating by taking them off the grass. We changed the forage. Thankfully, we got the trust of those involved that, in having influence over him. And by the time the Olympics came around, we had him in the right direction and a much healthier and happier horse. So he was down to, had lost 60 kilos by that point, and still obviously carrying a bit more than ideal, but down to a 3.5 on that score. And you can see how his insulin levels dropped. So Maria was talking about that earlier. There was still a very long way to go, but you can see just how high they were. And I'm sure Eimear and Maria might well comment on this sort of significance of being at that sort of level. He was very lucky he didn't end up with laminitis, quite frankly. So just my last slide to go, and sorry, well done everyone for sticking with it. I'm actually currently studying part-time for my PhD at the University of Glasgow, and we've just recently modified the EquiBCS app to try and make it more user-friendly. So we appreciate that condition scoring is not the easiest thing to do. So it's been updated. It also allows you to store your horse's data, multiple horses on there. You will see a graph of how their weight changes and fluctuates throughout the year if you put the information in. You can do both body weight and body condition score, and you can share your data. So if you are keeping a record and you want to discuss it with your vet or nutritionist, you can email it straight from the app to someone that you would like a second opinion. So please use it. It's available on the App Store, Apple App Store and Google Play. If I sound like I know what I'm talking about with those sorts of things, I really don't. So I'm just relaying what I'm told, but I've managed to find it. So I'm sure if I can, you will. But please use it, please review it. And if you have time, and I can put this in the chat box or send it to you, there is an online survey to basically feedback what you think. So the first round we surveyed, we had over 100 people giving us feedback about the adaptations or the changes that they wanted. So please do make use of that, and it's free, so it doesn't cost you anything to download. And the university have a range of apps, which if you're interested in being a vet or a dentist, there's lots of information on those apps for you. So brilliant, thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because Eimear and Maria have kindly rejoined us, so I can see lots of Q&As and chats coming in. So if I stop sharing, you'll see us, and I can start to have a look at the questions and direct them to Eimear and Maria. So what have we got? Okay, this is a nice succinct one. Is it good to exercise a pony that is not overweight when it is a little bit fitty? What would your thoughts on that be, ladies?
I think, I guess it depends on the reason it's a little bit footy, because we can have horses that are a little bit short on their feet for whatever reason. It might necessarily not be laminitis, and it might be good to get someone to have a look on it. And obviously if it is like something that we're suspicious and might have laminitis, we would be happy, but it needs to have support on its feet, a fully supported foot. So obviously us working with farriers or using hoof boots, and then we would limit the kind of concussion exercise. If it is actually in laminitis, we want it to be on a softer surface, and it would be walk work. If it's not laminitis and it's something else, then we might look down different avenues to get it a little bit more comfortable. So it just kind of depends. Footy is like probably quite a broad term, I would say.
But if it is laminitis, yes, exercise, just moving around is positive. We wouldn't say, of course, cantering, trotting, that's way too much, but movement is very positive because the lamina, they benefit from that increased blood flow. So yes, just inside the box is not good enough. They need to do some exercise, yes.
I think it's a really valid point that the sort of fitty definition is really hard, isn't it, to sort of quantify or qualify even, because does it, in your mind, does that indicate there's some clinical, obviously some clinical, because there's pain, that's effectively what's causing the animal to be fitty. So presumably there are some clinical sort of changes or issues already occurring at that point. So it's really difficult to judge, particularly without seeing the horse, I guess. But
yeah, definitely. And I think we just want to support them to make them comfortable while they're exercising, so it's more beneficial.
We've got a really interesting question, so thank you to the person who put this one up. I'd like to ask about EMS in a lightweight horse. I have an 8-year-old ex-racer who's always been lean. He's recently been diagnosed with EMS after a full blood profile was completed due to him losing weight for no apparent reason. How do you manage EMS in a horse that needs to gain weight? And this is really useful information. She's described him as a 1 on the condition score chart, so really quite lean. Can you sort of expand a little bit on EMS in an underweight? Is that not, it seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
No, that's not very common, because we said usually it's due to obesity, but the point here is really the fat in the wrong places. So probably that horse, although quite skinny, might have that fat deposits in the wrong places. Just like in people, you can have skinny fat people, and those people are also more prone to diabetes. People that have a big belly, but in the rest they are quite skinny. So those people are prone to diabetes. The same thing with horses. So fat in the wrong places, they're again more prone. In this case, he was actually diagnosed. So as for diet, because okay, you don't want him to get overweight, but still you want him to gain some muscle, some good, nice weight for him. So of course, exercise, because exercise will just influence more the anabolic hormones. So for him to put muscle. And then as for the food, you can increase the calories with fiber, of course, and then also with some good fats. So you can add some oil to his diet. Linseed oil is very good. It's anti-inflammatory. So I would go more for this, and absolutely no carbs, no sugars. So exercise and oil plus good fiber. And again, continue to repeat the blood analysis just to be sure how is he responding to the new diet and with exercise, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Brilliant. And a similar sort of related question, I think you've probably answered, but ladies, a bit curious about a 17-year-old saddlebred mare with cresty neck and puffy above eyes, but then thin and ribby, not fat. And I don't know whether you want to sort of just perhaps touch on PPID, because obviously
Exactly.
given
That's what we were both
we were
thinking about this
yeah.
one.
So in this, we didn't discuss PPID. In this case, we were just discussing obesity and EMS, but of course, then you have also PPID. People usually also address it as Cushing's disease. And it's a little bit different. It's also a metabolic disease, and it's also due to, you have also hyperinsulinemia. So it's because of that you can also have laminitis. Okay, in this case, she can also have the two things at the same time. She can have PPID and EMS because she's ribby. Okay, maybe it's just really the PPID. So again, more exercise over positive, because it just overall metabolic wise makes the hormones work better, and also how they absorb the nutrients just makes everything correct. And then what type of food are you giving? Not so much sugars, give a little bit more fiber. And if you need to add more energy, just go for the oils like linseed oil. Yeah.
I think also a thing to mention is in that kind of case, a 17-year-old, we kind of tend to see PPID in older horses. So 15 and older is more a classic thing. And then we get a gray area of, are they EMS or PPID? And it's important then in that case to test for the Cushing's hormones and to look at the EMS ones also. And as Maria said, it can happen concurrently. So it can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but also like it could just be Cushing's rather than EMS also. But it's good to have a blood panel to look at the metabolic derangement, so we can look at where we're working on and what we're working with.
And do you both have a view on when you would test for PPID? Because there's some debate as to whether the autumn or not and things like that. So do you want to sort of expand on that a little bit? When's the best time to test for PPID?
Well, I think actually it's easier if you test in autumn because they have the natural increase in ACTH, but you can just test it all year round because the labs already know and they give us different references. But for us to be more clear, ideally in autumn is when they have the big spike of ACTH. So maybe that's a good part of the year to do the
I
test.
think the thing is, if your horse clinically is showing signs, you're not going to tell them to wait for autumn. So that's why we're lucky enough to have the reference range.
And the signs are, again, ribby, a little lethargic, and has those fat deposits in the wrong places, the coat, the long coat. So, and also being older horse.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, there's a couple on, so Hannah's asked, when you say no grass, only soaked hay, how long for, please? It really depends if you agree on sort of how quickly you can get the weight off. So once you've got them at the sort of level where you're happy that they're not gaining weight or not, maybe if your insulin levels have come back to a sensible level, then you might start to risk putting them at grass. But would you agree with that, or are there any other parameters you would use before?
I think there's no one size fits all, unfortunately. It would be really good. We'd really love that, but with these cases it just depends really on the specific horse. So like we would really like to retest them to see what their response is, and like you said, if clinically they've lost a lot of weight and they're doing a lot better, then that's it. But we don't have one specific time range really, I would think.
No, I think you've got to each case by its own merits, really, haven't you? And it can be a very long process, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that is probably one of the hardest things with laminitis is it's a really long process. It's a long rehab. It takes a lot of patience, and that's why we kind of want to start tackling the EMS and getting in there before we're that far down the line.
Definitely. Prevention's better than cure, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions on the types of straw. So the studies that have been done, we tend to use oat straw in the UK for horses. The Janssen et al. Study actually used wheat straw to replace haylage. Someone's asked specifically about barley straw, and I think it really depends what you can get access to and the quality and all those other variables, but generally speaking it would be oat, then wheat, then barley. So and that's generally from the research and the studies that have been done. There's one here. If I set you off talking, this person says it's a little bit off topic, but what sort of worming regime would you advise for an EMS horse not on pasture? I don't know if you're happy to answer that one. I just look in the chat box because I was in the Q&A.
Yeah, so I am. I have a real bee in my bonnet at the moment about worming, because we're having massive problems with wormers and worming resistance because of blanket worming programs. So I would recommend getting worm egg counts done at least twice a year. The good thing about having a worm egg count done is we can look specifically at your horse. So like 20% of the horses will carry 80% of the worm. So you will actually end up saving money rather than worming everything. And then if you have a worm egg count done, often we can offer specific advice for your horse or how it would fit into your herd. So we have our nurse, Catherine, who I'm sure lots of you have spoken to about this, and she is a fountain of knowledge about wormers. So she will look at your worm egg counts and give you specific tailored advice in conjunction with us. So
yes, it's a really hot topic at the moment, even to the point of, I think, making wormers available through vets only to try and get on top of this anthelmintic resistance. So,
yeah, no, honestly, it is very scary because we are seeing colics in horses that are well wormed due to worms because they're resistant. So, and once they're resistant to wormers, we can't do anything. That's it.
Yeah. Overworming is going to become a thing of the past, I'm sure, just a little bit like over antibiotic use as well.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So what was the app called? Sorry, I missed the name of it. That's the EquiBCS. So as in equine sort of body condition score, EquiBCS, but just drop us a line and we can share that with you. In terms of where do you recommend sending haylage for analysis? So if you go to the Dengie website, there is a charge for some of the analysis on there. So you can do it all online. I think it's now all automated, and the various levels of analysis that you need. If you're just looking at sugars and sort of starch levels, then that's one analysis set that you can do, or you can look for labs. If you look at Kwood, CAWWOD, again, I don't know how much an account you need to have and things like that, but we can always send it on your behalf. But obviously if you do it through us, then we will do the interpretation for you as well. So just actually what does it all mean, so we can do that. Okay, some good questions here. Can treating Cushing's with medication lower insulin? Would insulin be more stubborn and levels harder to lower if Cushing's was left undiagnosed? That's definitely one for you, ladies.
Well, that's a very
topical.
Good, yeah, that's a very good question. Because okay, about Cushing's and hyperinsulinemia, laminitis, so that's a very hot topic. So we are still learning. So before we would say yes, definitely that you have the connection between Cushing's and hyperinsulinemia was direct. Nowadays we don't know anymore. So what we usually do is, if you have a horse with PPID and he's very lethargic, long coat, he's sweating, he's not coping with it, so we would say yes, treat it definitely, and then we will address the hyperinsulinemia with the diet and we see how it goes. Okay, but so now we just separate a bit the treatment of both of them. So it really depends. So if the horse is not coping with it, yes, I will treat, but then you need to check anyway the hyperinsulinemia. It can correct itself, or it might not correct itself because the diet needs to be adjusted. So it needs to be a little bit the two things separate nowadays. Again, you can have PPID and EMS at the same time, and we need to make sure that he doesn't have or that he has, and then we address the two things more or less separate, but one can influence the other one, yes, but not 100% necessarily.
And I think there was a study a few years ago now that showed if a horse had EMS in its sort of younger years, it was more likely to get PPID. Have you sort of seen any further work on that? I mean, it's another reason to get your horse's weight under control, isn't it? Because you don't want to increase their risk of PPID later in life.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Is that been backed up with any further studies, or we just on that one at the moment?
Well, to my information,
no, I think just that one at the moment. But
and another great question. Thank you for this one. I think this is a lady called Gillian. She's got a 23-year-old horse, had laminitis 4 years ago when she was very overweight. She's now fit and healthy, working 6 days a week, which is great. Well done. Should I get a blood profile now as a benchmark for the future, which is a fab question.
Yeah, I think it is really important. And like the most recent research they've been doing into laminitis, the insulin levels can give us an indicator of what the kind of likelihood of laminitis occurring in the next few years will be. There's some really good studies from London, the RVC, but basically, yeah, that it would be really good to have that benchmark, and then you can kind of address if there is a bit of hyperinsulinemia going on. So if the insulin is increased, we can address that now, because sometimes it can be deceptive even when they're looking really fit and things like that, because they have this metabolically active fat that kind of acts by its own law. Mm-hmm. It leaves them more prone anyway. So it's definitely good to just have a benchmark, 100%. Yeah, especially when she's doing so well at the moment.
Yeah, when they're healthy, it's a great time to know what sort of relative normal is, isn't it? Any advice on how to introduce grass and what would be the best way? Do you have thoughts on that? Have you seen any really good ways of reintroducing pasture to the ration? Or I suppose gradually is the key, really, like most things, changing diets or introducing things. But
I think a good thing I learned from Maria actually is if you are feeding a lot of soaked hay and they're not eating a lot, they're not keen on it, which is possible, before you let them out to grass, it is worthwhile giving them a little bit of tastier hay so they eat that, because that's the lesser evil than the grass. So what you don't want to do is send them out on a really empty stomach, so they can gorge and have a lovely time at the buffet with all the nice stuff. I think
especially because they don't need a lot of time to eat more than the calories they need for a day.
They can be pretty speedy.
They can be very efficient. Yeah. So we would say first, maybe don't put them in the field with an empty stomach. Make sure that they're already with the more or less full belly, and of course the grazing muzzles and everything. And I think it's also good when you have a good you just cover a little bit and you are opening your paddock to give a little bit more access to grass each time.
Yeah, and it's using your muzzles and things is a way you can sort of gradually reintroduce it as well. It just depends. It's so individual again as to what facilities and resources.
I think the thing to remember, a lot of people don't really like using muzzles, or the horses take a while to get used to it. But I think the thing to remember is if your horse can wear a muzzle, it can go outside and enjoy that more normal part of life. So that's really a lot more important than them not really liking the muzzle, I would think.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think that's the key, isn't it? We all want to get them outside and allow them to be a horse if we possibly can, don't we? Okay, back to the Q&A. There's one here. A Welsh section D, slightly overweight, struggles to lose weight, and the vet's not happy with her fat deposits. We've done a caro test, blood test, and very good results. Vet happy that it's not EMS. She has soaked hay, exercised for half an hour to 1.5 hours, 6 days a week, reduced hours on grass compared to the other horses, 5-6 hours a day with a muzzle, gets very unsettled when on a bare paddock or in the stable longer, very little feed and not over rugged. Vet's happy with our management, but says we still need to get some weight off. Any suggestions? I guess from my point of view, it'd be considering the straw. If the dentition is okay and you're doing everything else, then even soaked hay will still be higher in calories than straw. So that would be one option to try and reduce the overall calorie intake. And you're doing quite a lot of work anyway, 1.5 to 1.5 hours, 6 days a week. Would you go down the medication route for this one? Or?
Well, I think looking at the intensity of the work as well. So you need to kind of look at, are you like working, are they going out for a nice little walk, or is it the kind of work that if you were doing it, you'd be like, oh my God, make it stop. I need to take it on now. Like you want to really push them to use themselves. If you are doing all of those things, if you've looked at the straw option, if you've done the exercise, and obviously it's completely specific to the horse, hypothetically, then maybe but I would like to exhaust every other.
And before that, also just give it time, because things take time. So it's not instant. And not because you started working out your horse for 2 weeks or even 1 month, you will see straight away results. So you need to give it time at least 3 months until you see something. So just continue consistently your work, don't give up, and then you will see results. It's not possible. You will see some results. So just keep up positive and you will see some good results.
I think also, like, if you don't have the raised insulin and things like that, it's not as like urgent or imminent, and that actually the equine BCS app might be a good one to look at, because you can obviously look at the photos and your progress. It's a really good way to monitor your progress. And I think, yeah, it's the hardest thing, isn't it? If you're seeing the horse every day,
you get used to it.
Yeah, and I think with native in particular, not over rugging in the winter, that, you know, use those colder months to try and help them burn a little bit extra energy and promote the weight loss in the winter if you can. And I was thinking, I don't know whether you can try and help them feel a bit more settled in the bear paddock with, I don't know, some form of companion, small pony. You know, you see, laughing aside, but you see other animals used to keep racehorses company, to calm them down in the stable and
or
things.
Just enrichment, like having some small hay nets, even filled with some straw at different corners of the paddock, making them walk around to eat little bits.
Yeah, and even mirrors, sometimes mirrors in the stable as well, so they think they've got someone else with them. They don't know it's them themselves. You know, if they're the proper, what, not obviously glass type things, but you can put some of those sorts of things in the stable to make them feel like they've got a friend. So there are some other things. So obviously getting them off the grass for a period of time when it's highest calorie, so those spring months, and you're coming into that classic peak, aren't we, for spring grass. So even if you just use it at certain times a year to reduce your risk, there may be strategies you can employ. I think we're getting there on the questions. Any others?
The hay gain one as well, about the steaming.
Ah, well done. Yes, I skipped over that. So I'm interested if you found the paper on the hay gain website, because the definite opinion is that it won't remove the sugars, because you simply haven't got enough moisture in the steam to remove the sugar. And I'm pretty sure hay gain basically talk about that it isn't as effective as removing sugar, so as soaking would be, because they actually, a lot of the presentations they do, and it's Muriel Moore Collier from the not the RVC, where she Cirencester Royal Ag College, they do the work, quite a lot of the work for hay gain, and she always talks about, if you want the hygiene benefits, you have to soak first and then steam, so you get the sugar out and then you steam them. So I don't know that it would be on there. I'm surprised if it is on the website, but I'll have to have a look at that, and maybe we can follow up with you afterwards on that. But certainly the general advice is to soak, and then if you want to improve the hygienic quality, because what hay gain talk about is the fact that soaking has seemingly increases the bacterial load in the soaked forages quite considerably. Now, there is some debate as to whether that really has any impact on the horse's health, because yes, there's more bacteria there, but we've been feeding soaked forages without seemingly causing too many issues for a number of years. So are the bacteria there, but basically not doing any harm by being there? But they're very much promoting soaking for removing sugar, and then steaming to improve the hygienic, getting rid of those bacteria. So yeah, that's the best of my knowledge on it, but so I'll have a dig around on their website, because I'd be surprised if they are actually saying that. Any others, any last minute questions? I think we've done all the ones in the, oh, hang on, have we? Yeah, so is there any research to show when may be best to give medication to lower insulin, like before exercise or before food or after, or does this make no difference? Any
So usually the new medication that we use is not really, doesn't act on the insulin, acts on the sugar. So it will act then on the insulin. It's the ertugliflozin. So that one, what makes it, basically the horse will pee the extra sugar. So then the insulin will go down again. It doesn't really make any difference if you give before exercise or after food. You just give it naturally. And we like to use it when you have horses and ponies with really, really high levels of insulin of like more than 300, and we cannot control it just with the food in the beginning. So we like to use it in really acute cases, because again, the most important part is feeding. So we try to manage those ones until they have a normal level, and then we keep for the rest with a good feeding plan, so the insulin levels don't spike again. So because if you are giving medication, you are not really fixing the problem, because the problem is really the metabolism itself. And a horse is not it's an animal that's well built, so it's for a reason that it has high insulin. Okay, we can just discuss all the physiology, but in the end it's really food. We need to give them less sugary feed and make their insulin a little bit more sensitive.
And if you're seeing fluctuations when doing blood tests for insulin with no apparent dietary changes, no grass in the diet, do they just fluctuate from, say, something like eating forage, or are there other known sort of triggers or reasons it fluctuates?
I think, first of all, like, we try not to take insulin just like by itself, because yeah, it can fluctuate. It can fluctuate after eating. It can fluctuate if your horse is really needle shy, then they might have an insulin spike with that. So I think, like, it's good not to look at it in isolation. And we try to look at it as a picture as a whole. So like, if there's clinical signs, if we notice some of the regional adiposity, and if the adiponectin and the glucose are doing funny things. And the other thing is, in these cases, if they are fluctuating, it might be one that we do a caro test on. So we give the sugar and see how the insulin responds to that.
And just, I think probably last one, are there medications on the banned substance list for the FEI? I'm pretty sure metformin was, because it's why Amanda couldn't use it for Remy, but are the other ones prohibited substances?
Well, level 100% yes,
Yeah.
and I think the new one I would say as well, because yeah, it's messing with the metabolism, so yes.
Yeah, if it's impacting on blood glucose, I am sure they're going to have something to say about it. And that's the other dilemma, isn't it, for sort of sports horses and these big warm bloods. But as you said, the first port of call is always diet and exercise.
I think the important thing to remember about all of these medications is they do not treat EMS. They manage the body's response and they manage the symptoms, but it's not treating the syndrome. And the best way to treat it is your diet and your exercise to make you more insulin sensitive. So I think that's really important to remember.
Definitely. And I think probably sounds like a really good place to draw to close, because that's definitely the take-home message. Get the weight off for all sorts of reasons. I think it's not predisposing them to having PPID in older age and all of these things. It's definitely prevention's better than cure. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Eimear and Maria. That's brilliant evening. So much information. And I say there is a recording. It's been recording away. So we will make that available to everyone, to the Denji YouTube channel. And I'm sure Stringer Vets will be sharing things to it as well. And do look out for any activity. I think there's a Weybridge clinic.
Yeah, so we actually have a Weybridge day scheduled, and it'll be the 6th of April. At one of the yards we go to in Exeter. So if people would like to sign up for that, if maybe they email the practice, that would be the best, I think. Yeah,
fantastic. And I think vet partners have done sort of goodie bags and things with various things.
Yeah, we have some kits as well, so there's some
tapes
like that,
lots of information, which has been really nicely put together by Tasha behind the scenes at Vet Partners and things. So it's well worth signing up for that. But thank you both very much indeed, and thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in April for the Weybridge clinic. I have to end it for all, so I will cut everyone off, but thank you guys, and hopefully see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye everyone.